What is going on, you guys? Alex here with Sportline, bringing you another Tesla video. In today's video, we're going to be installing our lift kit on this Tesla Model Y, our overlanding Model Y, and this is going to be a spacer lift that installs on the top of the front struts as well as the rear shocks and springs. While this does not add any additional suspension travel to your suspension, it is going to be effective in providing extra ground clearance as well as retaining the factory ride quality. And here we are doing our before measurements. You can see we're sitting at about 30 inches front and rear. So our first step here is going to be to remove the trim in our front trunk area. This is going to be very similar to what we did on our Model 3 lowering video. It's going to be a wire connection we need to remove under this trim panel, and then the cowl panel should just unclip and we can pull it straight up and out of the car. There's going to be a clip here we need to remove on the windshield washer reservoir, and then we're going to need to remove these 4 10mm bolts. Now we'll be able to pull the whole trim piece up and out of the vehicle. Now we can go ahead and lift the car up, and we're going to start removing all the wheels from the vehicle. Now we're going to remove the 10mm bolt securing the brake line to the knuckle assembly, and we're also going to unclip our ABS wire harness here. Now that we've got those out of the way, we can go ahead and remove the nut securing the sway bar end link and get that out of our way. And we're going to do this on both sides. On this other side here, once we have the one disconnected, we're going to need to apply a pry bar to release some of the tension, and then we can remove this side. After that, we can go ahead and remove the bolt going through the lower shock mount. And now we will use a Torx and a socket to remove the nut and bolt securing the upper control arm to the knuckle. Now we're going to lower the car back down so we can access the 3 top nuts securing the front strut to the vehicle. And unlike the Model 3 here, we actually do have big enough holes to access these nuts, so we can go ahead and remove them through these access holes. And on the last one here, we're going to support the strut from underneath as we remove the nut, just so it doesn't drop out. And with that clip removed from the washer fluid reservoir, you're actually able to rotate it up and out of the way like this so you can access the 3 nuts. Now we are free to completely remove the front struts from the car. And we're just going to move these over to our bench and get our spacer kit bolted on the top. The spacer is going to slide right over the studs already on the struts, And then we're just going to get these nuts started to secure it down. And don't tighten the nuts down all the way until you have all 3 of them started. You're going to need it a little bit loose here so you actually have enough room to get the nut in. As you can see, we kind of pull up on the spacer a little bit to get that room, get the nut started, move on to the next, and once all 3 are started, we'll go ahead and tighten them all down. And we're just going to use our wrench here to get these all tightened up. And you'll notice there are now 3 threaded holes on the top of the spacers, so we're going to use the provided bolts in the kit, and these are going to go down through those access holes where we removed the factory nuts, and we're just going to thread the bolts down into the spacer kit to secure the top of the strut assembly. So we're going to go ahead, get the vehicle lifted back up, and get the front struts reinstalled. And again, we're going to support the strut from the bottom, get it lifted up, and try and get our holes lined up so we can get the bolts started and get all 3 of them threaded in and snugged up. And now we will get our lower bolt pushed back through the lower shock mount. And this is a little bit tricky with the extra length now with the spacer kit installed. We got an extra set of hands and a pry bar to get us enough room to get that lower shock bolt started. Now we can just reassemble everything else in the front, so we're going to get our upper control arm bolted back in. And we're going to get our sway bar end links back into position. And we've also left our lower shock bolt just snug at this point. We haven't fully tightened it up. We're going to put the vehicle back on the ground before we fully tighten all of our lower shock bolts that go through the bushings. And now we just need to get our ABS wire clipped back in, as well as our brake line. And now we can get all of the front trim pieces put back in, so we're going to rotate our washer reservoir back into position and reinstall the clip. Going to drop our front trim piece back in, get those 10mm bolts tightened up, as well as our cowl panel. Now moving on to the rear, we're going to start by removing the plastic trim on the bottom of the spring buckets. And since we're on the lift here, we're going to use the screw jack here to support our lower control arm as we remove the bolts through the knuckle and the lower shock mount. Now we can lower the lower control arm back down. And we're going to start with the upper bolts on the shocks, and then they will drop out and we can pull them completely out of the car. Installation of the rear shock spaces are as simple as putting through the longer bolt and spacer, and here we're going to reuse the stock clips that come on these stock bolts, and this is just going to help hold everything together as we reinstall it back into the vehicle. Before we reinstall the rear shocks though, we're going to want to go ahead and remove the rear springs while everything is loose, so we can just push down on our lower spring bucket here and pull the spring out. The spacer kit is going to go right on top of the stock rubber spring isolator, so we can just set it on top and then reinstall the spring. Just make note of the spring's orientation in the lower spring bucket as you removed it. There's also going to be the rubber tabs here that we're going to show in just a second that will help you line it up. You're going to want to make sure those rubber tabs stick through the bottom of the spring bucket just like this. Now with our rear spring installed, we can go ahead and reinstall the rear shock. We'll get our upper bolts threaded in first to hold it in place. So with the upper bolts started holding the shock in place, we can now use the screw jack to lift the lower control arm back up into position. Now we can slide our lower shock bolt through the hole. And we're just going to get the nuts started. We'll fully tighten these on the ground. But we're going to lower our screw jack here, place it underneath the shock, and we're going to jack up on this area here to get the knuckle lined up. Now with this hole lined up, we can go ahead and slide our bolt back through. At this point, the install is complete. We're going to go ahead and bolt our wheels and tires back up and get the car lowered to the ground, and then we will torque our lug nuts and fully torque our lower shock bolts. So here we are, ensuring the lug nuts are torqued to 129 foot-pounds. And now we will fully tighten all of our lower bolts with the weight of the vehicle on them. And here are our final measurements. As you can see, we gained a solid 2 inches. We're now sitting at 32 inches, front and rear. The last step after installing this kit would be to have an alignment performed. After you have your car aligned, we're going to want to go into the controls here and go to service and go to our camera calibration, and we're going to want to clear the calibration, and we're going to drive for a bit, and the cameras are going to relearn at our current ride height, and this is going to ensure that all the systems are working properly. So here's a look at the finished product, improved ride height and looks, especially with the off-road wheel and tire package. If you want to check this product out for yourself, you can do that at tsportline.com. If you have any questions, make sure to leave a comment down below. If you're not already, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever we post new videos. We've got lots more Tesla content coming very soon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.